The stars twinkled brightly in the night sky as Jake sat on his porch, enjoying the calm evening. The world around him was quiet, peaceful, until his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. The message was from Lyra, an alien he had met a year ago. "Jake, I need your help. It's urgent. Please call me." His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the first time he heard from Lyra, but something about this message felt different. Usually, their conversations were light, almost friendly. But tonight, there was a sense of desperation in her words. Without wasting a moment, Jake dialed her number. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. "Jake, thank you for calling." Lyra's voice echoed through the receiver, her tone strained and distant. "I know this might sound strange, but I need your help. During mating season." Jake froze. "Mating season?" he repeated, trying to make sense of her words. He'd heard about it before in passing conversations with her, but he had never paid much attention. He knew it was a big deal for her species, but how did he, a human, fit into this? "Yes, it's the time when my people go through transformations," Lyra explained, her voice cracking with emotion. "It's important for us, but we're not always prepared for it. I need someone to help me through it." Jake could hear the worry in her voice, and despite his confusion, he felt a sense of responsibility toward her. They had become friends over time, sharing stories about their different worlds and cultures. Helping her had always seemed like the right thing to do. But this was new. Mating season. What could he possibly do to help her with that? "Look, I don't understand," Jake said carefully, "but if you need me, I'll help. Just tell me what you need." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Jake could practically hear the tension building in the silence. Then Lyra spoke again, her voice softer now. "It's complicated, Jake, but you're the only one I can trust." Jake didn't know what to say. Trust. He had no idea what she meant, but he didn't want to leave her stranded. He had seen her struggle with things before. Her own kind often treated her differently because of her desire to befriend humans. It must have been hard for her, and now she needed his help more than ever. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Lyra hesitated, and when she spoke, there was a hint of fear in her voice. "I need you to be with me. You'll be part of the process. It's a delicate thing, and I need someone who can support me through it." Jake's mind raced. Part of the process. "What exactly are you asking, Lyra?" "I can't explain it fully now," she replied quickly. "Just trust me. I will explain everything when you get here. Please, Jake, this is important." Jake stared at the phone in his hand, his thoughts swirling. Was this some kind of test, or was it something more? He had no idea what she was really asking of him, but he couldn't ignore the panic in her voice. Something told him this wasn't just another request. It was urgent, and it was going to change everything. He looked at the time. It was late, but Lyra wasn't the type to ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary. If she was reaching out to him now, it meant she was in trouble. Maybe she had no one else to turn to. "Okay," he said finally, his decision made. "I'll come. Just tell me where." There was a pause before she gave him the location, a remote area on the outskirts of town. It seemed strange, but Jake didn't question it. He grabbed his jacket, feeling a sense of unease settle in his chest. As he walked out the door, he glanced up at the stars once more. The peaceful night seemed to mock his growing anxiety. The drive took longer than he expected. The road was empty, and the only light was from his headlights cutting through the darkness. As he approached the location, he saw Lyra standing alone in a clearing, her silhouette barely visible in the moonlight. She seemed calm, but there was something in the way she held herself that screamed tension. Jake parked the car and stepped out, walking toward her slowly. When she saw him, Lyra smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for coming, Jake," she said softly. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this, but I don't have anyone else." Jake nodded, but before he could ask any more questions, she motioned for him to follow. They walked deeper into the clearing, where strange symbols and patterns were drawn in the dirt. An ancient ritual space, Jake realized. His heart began to race again. "What is this?" he asked, unable to hide his confusion. "This is where my people connect," she said, her voice low. "It's not just a ritual. It's a bond, a deep connection that ties us together in a way you can't understand." Jake's mind raced as he tried to process everything. A bond. What kind of bond was she talking about? He had no idea, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to be a simple favor. He was about to become part of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. As he stood there, his heart pounding, he knew one thing for sure. Helping Lyra through this would lead him down a path he could never turn back from. Jake stood silently in the clearing, trying to make sense of what Lyra had just told him. The night was eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of rustling leaves to break the silence. It wasn't just a ritual, she had said. It was a bond. A deep, unexplainable connection. "Are you sure this is the only way?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra didn't immediately respond. She seemed lost in thought, her eyes scanning the markings on the ground, the ancient symbols that surrounded them. The moonlight cast a soft glow over her skin, and for a moment, Jake almost forgot that she wasn't human. She looked so normal, but the longer he stared, the more out of place everything felt. "This is the way of my people, Jake," she said, finally breaking the silence. "It's how we ensure survival. The bond. It's not just about procreation. It's about survival on a much deeper level, emotionally, physically, and spiritually." Jake swallowed, trying to comprehend what she was saying. Was she asking him to become a part of her species' ritual, to bond with her in a way that went beyond anything he had ever imagined? He wasn't prepared for this. "What does it mean, though?" Jake asked, his voice trembling slightly. "What happens if I agree?" Lyra turned to face him, her deep, alien eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart race. "If you agree, it will change everything. You will become part of my world. The bond isn't something that can be undone. It's permanent. There is no going back once you accept it." Jake's mind spun. He had trusted Lyra. They had shared laughs, exchanged stories, and learned from each other. But this was something he wasn't ready for. He hadn't signed up for a lifetime commitment to an alien species, no matter how close their bond had grown. "You're asking me to do something that I don't think I can," he said, his voice barely audible now. "I'm not ready for this. I'm just a human. I can't." Lyra stepped closer to him, her expression softening. "I understand, Jake. I never intended for this to happen. But the nature of my people's mating season, it's not something we can control. The bond is formed whether we want it or not. And I need someone who can help me through it, someone who can guide me, support me." Jake's chest tightened. Her words, filled with sincerity and vulnerability, made him feel even more trapped. There was no denying that he cared about her. But this was a whole other level. How could he, a human, be the one to help her, to become part of something so vast and otherworldly? "How do I even help you?" he asked, feeling overwhelmed. "What exactly do I have to do?" Lyra looked down at the ground for a moment before speaking. "It's not just about physical help. It's about emotional support. The bond can be overwhelming. We need someone strong enough to hold us together when the process becomes too intense. That's why I need you." Jake nodded slowly, though his mind was racing. He wanted to help. He really did. But the consequences of this were far greater than he had ever anticipated. Lyra stepped back, gesturing to the markings on the ground. "The ritual must begin soon. But first, I need you to understand something important." She looked at him seriously, her alien features becoming more pronounced in the low light. "Once the bond is formed, it's not just about us. You will become a part of my world, Just as I am becoming a part of yours, your life will change forever. Jake took a step back, trying to process everything. He had never been one to back down from a challenge. But this wasn't a challenge. It was a life-altering decision, one that could change everything he knew about himself and his relationship with Lyra. "You're telling me that if I do this, I'm bound to you forever?" he asked, his voice low with disbelief. Lyra nodded solemnly. "Yes, Jake. The bond is a commitment. It's not just a promise. It's a part of us. Once you help me, there's no going back. You will be tied to me and to my people in ways you can't imagine." The air felt thick around them, heavy with the weight of her words. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to process everything. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to leave before things got more complicated. But his heart was telling him that Lyra needed him. And when someone you cared about needed you, how could you refuse? "I need to think about this," Jake said, his voice shaky. "This is a lot to take in." Lyra stepped closer again, her gaze softening. "I understand. But understand this, Jake, you have a choice. I would never force you to do something you aren't ready for. But if you decide to help, you will be part of something far greater than anything you've ever known. It's not just about the ritual. It's about what happens after. It's about becoming family. Forever." Jake stood frozen in place, his mind torn between the unknown and his desire to help his friend. Was he really ready for this? Was he ready to give up everything he knew for something so foreign, so uncertain? But deep down, he knew that no matter how much he wanted to back away, the connection between him and Lyra was undeniable. He couldn't just walk away from someone who had trusted him this much. He had already been pulled into something much bigger than he could have imagined. With a deep breath, Jake finally spoke, his voice steady but uncertain. "I'll help you, Lyra. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me that I won't lose myself in all of this. I need to know that I can still be me, even after everything changes." Lyra's eyes softened, and she nodded. "I promise, Jake, you will always be you, but together we'll become something even more." And with that, Jake's fate was sealed. Jake's heart raced as he stood by Lyra, the weight of their conversation hanging heavily in the air. The ritual wasn't just about the bond. It wasn't just about helping Lyra through her people's mating season. It was something far greater, something that would change his life, whether he was ready or not. Lyra's calm presence seemed to ease his anxiety, but only for a moment. She had promised that he wouldn't lose himself in the process, but could he truly trust her? Could he trust that the bond wouldn't consume him? "We'll begin soon," Lyra said, breaking the silence, her voice steady yet filled with something Jake couldn't quite place. Was it anticipation? Fear? She turned to face the glowing symbols on the ground, the intricate markings now pulsating with a faint light. The atmosphere felt charged, almost alive with energy, as if the air itself was reacting to the ritual about to unfold. Jake followed her gaze, his breath catching. "What are those symbols?" he asked, unable to take his eyes off them. They weren't anything like human writing. The shapes twisted and curled in a way that felt organic, alive. It was as if they were constantly shifting, but when Jake focused on them, they stayed still. "They are the ancient symbols of my people's bond," Lyra explained, her voice soft but full of reverence. "They represent connection, unity, and the cycle of life. Each one tells a story of our ancestors, of our survival, of how we've survived for centuries. Every time the mating season comes, these symbols are redrawn, infused with our energy, our essence. They hold the power to bind two souls together." Jake nodded, trying to understand. But the more he learned, the more he felt like he was stepping into a world that was completely alien to him. This wasn't just a ritual. It was an entire culture, a way of life, and he was about to become part of it. "You said the bond is permanent," Jake said, his voice a little shaky as he looked back at Lyra. "What exactly does that mean for me? Am I going to change? Will I become like you? Lyra turned to him, her alien features lit by the soft glow of the symbols. The bond doesn't change who you are, she said, her tone reassuring. But it will connect us on a deeper level. It will allow us to understand each other in ways you can't imagine. You'll feel my emotions, my thoughts, and I'll feel yours. We will always know what the other is going through, no matter the distance. Jake tried to picture it. To know someone's thoughts, to share their deepest feelings. Was that even possible? The idea both terrified and intrigued him. What if he didn't want to know everything about Lyra? What if the connection became overwhelming? Will I be able to control it? Jake asked, his mind racing. What if I can't handle the connection? Lyra stepped closer, her eyes soft and sincere. It's a bond, Jake, not a chain. It will grow stronger over time, yes, but it will never overwhelm you. You will always have the choice to retreat, to step back. But when the bond is fully formed, we will be inseparable. You will be a part of me, just as I will be a part of you. She reached out and gently touched his arm, sending a spark of warmth through him. This isn't just a commitment to me, she added. It's a commitment to my people, to my world. And it's a commitment to yourself, to your future. Together, we can face things neither of us could ever imagine alone. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He was scared, yes, but he was also curious about what the bond would truly feel like. Would it be everything she promised? Would it change his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. Are you ready, Jake? The question hung in the air, weighted with the gravity of the decision. Jake didn't answer immediately. His mind spun with 1,000 questions and doubts. But when he looked at Lyra, standing there before him with such quiet strength, something shifted inside him. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the trust she had placed in him. She needed him. And he realized that, despite all the fear, he couldn't walk away now. Not when the stakes were so high. Not when he had already come this far. I'm ready, he said, his voice firm now, though a part of him still trembled with uncertainty. I'll help you. But only if we do this together. I need to know you'll be there for me too. Lyra smiled, the warmth of her expression making Jake feel like everything would be okay. I promise, Jake. We'll face this together, every step of the way. With that, Lyra began to move toward the center of the markings, her every step measured and deliberate. She gestured for Jake to follow, and as he did, the ground beneath them seemed to hum with energy. The symbols seemed to glow brighter now, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beat of Jake's heart. He knelt beside her, trying to steady his breath as the air around them grew thick with the power of the ritual. There was no turning back now. The bond was about to begin. And with it, a new chapter of his life, one he could never have imagined when he first met Lyra. Lyra looked at him one last time before closing her eyes and raising her hands toward the sky. Let the bond begin, she whispered, and Jake felt a surge of energy rush through him, a feeling like nothing he had ever experienced before. It was a sensation of connection, of unity, as if every fiber of his being was being drawn toward hers. The world around him seemed to fade away, leaving only Lyra, her presence overwhelming, and the bond that was forming between them. In that moment, Jake realized that his life and his fate would never be the same again. The world around Jake seemed to blur as the energy from the ritual consumed him. His body hummed with a strange, unfamiliar vibration, and his mind was filled with an overwhelming sense of connection. It was as if something deep inside him had awakened, something that had been dormant all his life. Lyra's presence beside him was unmistakable, but it was more than just her physical form. It was as if he could feel every thought, every emotion she had, and in return, she felt his. The bond had taken root, and it was immediate, too immediate. Jake wasn't sure whether it was the bond itself or the sheer force of the experience that was overwhelming him. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady, yet somehow it sounded like it was his own breath, The sensation was disorienting, like being pulled in two directions at once. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything happening around him, while his body was forced to adapt to the overwhelming energy that surrounded them. "Jake," Lyra's voice broke through the haze, soft but clear. "Don't fight it. Let it come naturally." Her words had a soothing quality, like a calm wave breaking over turbulent seas. Jake took a deep breath, trying to ground himself, but he felt a slight panic creep in. How was he supposed to let this happen naturally when he had no idea what was going on? He didn't know how to be part of something like this. Something so alien. "I feel strange," Jake said, his voice shaky as he tried to process the flood of emotions that surged through him. It wasn't just his own emotions he was feeling. It was Lyra's too. It was as though he could taste her fear, her doubts, her hopes. But there was something else, too, something stronger. Lyra squeezed his hand, her grip firm, yet gentle. "I know. It's normal. The connection is new, and it will take time to adjust. But you're doing well. You're stronger than you realize, Jake." Jake couldn't speak. All he could do was focus on the overwhelming force of the bond. The pull between them felt magnetic, as if their minds were merging into one. He couldn't distinguish his thoughts from hers anymore. Her memories, her experiences, and her emotions were all blending into his own. At first, it was terrifying. The sheer intensity of the connection made it hard to breathe. Jake wasn't sure how long he could keep this up. But then, slowly, something shifted. The flood of sensations began to feel less chaotic and more harmonious. It was like learning to play an instrument. At first, the notes were discordant, offbeat, and jarring. But with practice, they started to fall into rhythm. Jake was beginning to understand the unspoken language of the bond. It wasn't just words. It wasn't even just feelings. It was everything. A shared consciousness, a shared existence. Lyra's presence was no longer something external to him. It was as if she had become a part of him, a part of his very soul. He could feel her past, the memories of her people, the weight of her world, and the endless cycles of life that had shaped her. He could feel her hopes for the future, the love she had for her people, and the fear she held in her heart. But amidst the flood of thoughts, there was a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that settled over him. He wasn't alone anymore. They were connected, bound in a way that transcended the physical. And as he absorbed more of Lyra's emotions, Jake realized something. He was learning about her people, her culture, her very essence. But in return, she was learning about him too. The bond worked both ways. Lyra could now feel his life, his memories, his hopes, and his fears. The complexity of his own existence was now as clear to her as her own was to him. Jake had always felt isolated, disconnected from others. His human experiences had seemed so trivial compared to the vastness of the universe. But now, he understood something he hadn't before. In the grand scheme of things, the human experience wasn't insignificant. It was unique, precious, and powerful. And Lyra, his alien friend, was starting to understand that too. "You're starting to understand," Lyra whispered, her voice soft, but filled with a strange awe. "Your thoughts, they're different from mine, but they're beautiful. Your world is so fragile, yet so strong. I see it now." Jake's heart skipped a beat. It was as if she was seeing the world through his eyes, seeing everything he had experienced, everything he had felt. And in a way, it was like he was seeing her world through hers too. They were no longer separate beings. They were connected in a way that transcended physical boundaries. But as the connection deepened, so did the stakes. Lyra's world was still far from him, and the consequences of their bond were far from clear. What would happen when the ritual was over? Would they be able to return to their separate lives, or was their fate now entwined forever? Jake wasn't sure. The more he felt, the more questions arose. But for now, there was only the present, only the bond that had tied them together in a way neither of them had ever anticipated. Lyra's voice brought him back to the moment. Jake, you have to understand. This is only the beginning. The bond will grow stronger, and with it, our connection will become even deeper. But there's more. There's something I haven't told you yet. Jake's pulse quickened, the weight of her words hanging heavily in the air. What could be more than this? What else could she be hiding? Lyra turned her gaze to the glowing symbols once more, her expression serious. There are dangers. We can't always control how the bond will affect us. And there are forces, both within my people and beyond, that will not understand what we've done. We will be tested, Jake. Our bond will be tested. Jake swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come into this expecting to help Lyra. He hadn't anticipated being thrust into something far larger, something far more dangerous. He couldn't help but wonder if they had both just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But as Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with both resolve and vulnerability, Jake realized one thing. There was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The air around Jake seemed to crackle with intensity as Lyra's words settled deep within him. There was a chill in the air now, a sense of foreboding that he hadn't felt before. Her warning lingered, casting a shadow over the connection they had forged. Despite the overwhelming bond they shared, there was an unsettling weight to what she had said. He looked at her, trying to read her expression. Lyra was always so composed, but now there was something different in her eyes, a flicker of doubt, maybe even fear. She had been so confident before, but now her uncertainty was clear. For the first time, Jake realized that the alien world she came from might be more dangerous than he had imagined. "What do you mean, we'll be tested?" Jake asked, his voice low. He wasn't sure what to expect from this newfound bond, but the idea of it being tested felt like a breaking point. He didn't even know the full scope of what they had done yet, and now the stakes seemed to have escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. Lyra didn't answer right away. She gazed at the symbols that still glowed softly in the air around them, her fingers brushing over the shimmering light. The energy from the ritual seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "There are powers," she began slowly, "forces that do not understand or accept what we've done. Our bond, it is not just between you and me. It has implications for both our worlds." Jake could feel his pulse quicken. The weight of her words was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a personal connection. They had altered something fundamental, something far larger than either of them. "You mean there are people who will come after us?" Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. The implications of what she was saying were becoming clearer by the second. Lyra nodded solemnly, her gaze never leaving the swirling lights. "Yes. My people, the others in my world, they won't understand what we've done. And there are beings outside of my world, too, who monitor such things. They have their own ways of controlling what happens in this universe. Our bond, it is something they will notice, and when they do, they will come for us." Jake felt a chill run through him, but there was something else, too, a strange determination that burned inside him. Lyra's warning, while unsettling, didn't scare him. Instead, it fueled something else, a need to protect this connection, this bond that had already begun to feel like a part of him. If what they had done was so powerful, so important, then it was worth fighting for. "What happens if they come?" Jake asked, though part of him already feared the answer. He could sense that Lyra's world was more complex than he had ever imagined. What kind of forces could threaten something as intimate as their bond? "They will try to separate us," she said quietly. "The bond will be seen as dangerous to the balance of both our worlds. They might try to tear us apart, force us to sever the connection. And if they do that, it could destroy both of us." Jake's breath caught in his throat. The thought of losing this connection, of losing Lyra after everything they had gone through, was unbearable. But there was something else that gnawed at him, something more insidious than the threat of separation. "If they can separate us." Jake's voice trailed off as a thought hit him like a lightning bolt. What if they use our bond to control us? Lyra's eyes widened, and she stepped back slightly, her expression tight with worry. That is a very real possibility. Our bond is not just a connection. It is a power. And if someone were to exploit it, her voice faltered for the first time since the ritual had begun. Jake's heart began to race, the thought of being manipulated through their bond sending waves of anxiety through him. But at the same time, there was something else, the sense that they could fight back, that together they could protect what they had forged. But what if we fight it? Jake asked, his voice more resolute than he felt. If we have this connection, this power, can't we use it to protect ourselves? Lyra was silent for a moment, considering his words. When she spoke again, her tone was filled with both caution and hope. The bond is strong, but it is also delicate. If we learn to control it together, to strengthen it, we might be able to fight back. But we need to understand it fully first, and that will take time. Jake nodded, his resolve hardening. He didn't care how long it would take. He would do whatever it took to protect their bond, and to protect Lyra. He had come into this with no idea of the risks, but now, the stakes were clear. And if there was even a chance they could defend themselves, he would fight for it. But the thought lingered. What if it wasn't just them against the world? What if the real enemy was something far darker, something that had been watching them from the shadows all along? Suddenly, the air around them shifted. The soft glow from the ritual symbols began to dim, and a coldness crept in. Jake's senses, already heightened by the bond, flared. He turned to Lyra, his eyes searching for any sign of danger. Lyra's expression had shifted as well. She stood taller, more alert, and her eyes glimmered with an intensity that Jake hadn't seen before. Something had changed. "They're here," she whispered. "We're not alone." Before Jake could react, the ground beneath them trembled. The connection between them pulsed violently, sending shockwaves of energy through the air. It was as though the universe itself was responding to the threat that was now closing in. And then, in an instant, the air was thick with an unfamiliar presence, a darkness that surrounded them, closing in like a storm. Lyra's eyes met Jake's, and in that moment, they both knew. This was the beginning of a fight they couldn't avoid. The test had begun. The darkness surrounding them deepened, a palpable weight that seemed to press in from every direction. Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline surging through him as his instincts screamed for him to act. The bond between him and Lyra pulsed with an intensity he had never felt before. It was as if the very air itself was charged, vibrating with a strange energy that he couldn't comprehend. Lyra's eyes, wide with determination, flicked around them, searching for the source of the disturbance. Her fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over the symbols, their glow flickering like dying embers in the growing shadow. "We need to move," she said, her voice low but urgent. "They're closing in." Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her along as they moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the stillness. The world around them seemed to warp, the light from the ritual symbols twisting and distorting in ways that made his head spin. Every step they took felt heavier, as if the very ground beneath their feet was resisting them. "Who are they?" Jake's voice was tight with fear, but there was also a sharp edge of anger. He couldn't believe this was happening. Not now, not after everything they had been through. He had come to understand the dangers of the bond they shared, but this was something else entirely. Whoever these beings were, they were no longer just a distant threat. They were here, now, and they were determined to take what was his. Lyra's grip tightened on his hand, her face set in a grim expression. "They are the guardians. They are the ones who regulate the bonds between worlds, between beings. They watch for any disturbances, any connections that they deem too dangerous. And what we've done, it's more than they can allow." Jake's heart sank. The guardians. He had heard of them in passing, in stories that Lyra had shared, but he hadn't realized just how powerful they were. They weren't just protectors of order. They were enforcers of a cold, unforgiving law that didn't care about personal connections. To them, their bond was a violation that could not go unpunished. "We need to break it," Jake said, his voice raw. He didn't know what breaking the bond would mean. But at this moment, the thought of losing Lyra to these mysterious beings was unbearable. Lyra shook her head quickly. "No, breaking it would destroy us both. It's not a choice we can make. If they force us to sever the connection, it will kill everything between us, everything we've built." Jake's mind raced. His fingers gripped her hand tighter, his thoughts scrambling to find another solution. But as they moved deeper into the heart of the disturbance, it became clear that their options were limited. The air around them was thick with energy, crackling like static. Every step forward felt like walking through a wall of resistance. The bond, once a source of strength, now felt like a tether pulling them into danger. Suddenly, the air shifted again, and Jake felt a cold hand of fear grip his chest. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked in a dark, ethereal mist. Its presence was suffocating, its shape shifting and flickering like a mirage. It didn't speak, but the pressure in the air grew, and Jake could feel the weight of its gaze, as if it were looking right into his soul. Lyra's breath caught, and she stepped in front of Jake, instinctively trying to shield him. "You've come," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure's presence seemed to grow even more oppressive as it stepped closer. It was impossible to read its face, but the energy radiating from it was unmistakable. It wasn't a being that lived by rules. It was something ancient, something that existed beyond the boundaries of time and space. "You are the ones who have disturbed the balance." The figure spoke, its voice a low, echoing hum that resonated deep within Jake's chest. The tone was filled with both authority and contempt, as if it already knew their fates. "The bond you have created, by your actions, you have violated the laws of the universe. And for that, you will pay." Jake's breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The weight of the figure's words seemed to hang in the air, suffocating him, paralyzing him. He had no idea how to fight something like this. How could he defend against an enemy that was beyond his comprehension? He wasn't a warrior. He was just a man, caught in a web of forces he couldn't even begin to understand. Lyra, though, didn't falter. She stood tall, her gaze unwavering, meeting the figures with a calmness that Jake could never have expected. "You cannot control this," she said, her voice steady and defiant. "We've created something that you cannot take away. The bond we share is stronger than your laws, stronger than your power." The figure's form flickered, and for a brief moment, Jake thought he saw a hint of something like amusement in the shadowy depths of its eyes. But the moment passed quickly, and the figure's voice grew colder. "You are naive, alien," it said, its words laced with disdain. "The bond you speak of is a disease. It will unravel everything you've known and everything you've become. You cannot stand against the will of the Guardians." The air around them grew colder still, and Jake could feel his entire body tense with an overwhelming sense of dread. But then something shifted within him. The bond, the connection between him and Lyra, wasn't something they could just take away. It was a part of him now, a force that ran through him as deeply as his blood. "We'll see about that," Jake said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the fear coursing through him. He didn't know how, but he would find a way to protect Lyra. He would find a way to protect their bond. Lyra's eyes met his, and in that moment, they both knew. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was a fight to keep something that meant more than anything else in their lives. The Guardians might have been powerful, but they had no idea what they were up against. With a sudden surge of energy, Jake and Lyra stood side by side, ready to face whatever was coming next. The moment of stillness shattered as the air around them seemed to warp with a low hum. Jake felt it first, an eerie shift, like the universe itself was holding its breath. The figure, the Guardian, towered before them, its presence growing heavier by the second. Yet, despite the fear curling in his gut, A sense of resolve settled within Jake. The bond between him and Lyra, the strange connection they had fought for, was not something that could be so easily severed. It was a force that transcended their understanding, a force that he would defend with everything he had. Lyra, too, stood firm beside him, her eyes locked on the figure before them. Her expression was one of quiet determination, a strength Jake had come to admire and depend on. "You underestimate us," she said, her voice steady despite the mounting tension in the air. "We are more than just a bond. What we've created together is greater than your laws, your authority, and we won't let you destroy it." The figure flickered again, its form seeming to distort, like a ripple in a dark pool. "You speak of strength, alien," it responded, its voice now cold and distant. "But strength is not what you need in this moment. You will learn that soon enough. No one defies the Guardians. No one." A heavy silence fell over them. Jake could feel the weight of the figure's words hanging in the air, a threat that chilled him to the bone. But as much as he wanted to crumble under the pressure, something inside him, a spark of defiance, maybe, refused to bow. He couldn't, not when Lyra was standing right beside him, ready to face whatever this being was capable of. "You're wrong," Jake said, his voice ringing out with an edge of clarity he hadn't expected. "This isn't about defiance. It's about love, about something that goes beyond your rules and boundaries. You don't understand that." Lyra nodded, her grip on Jake's hand tightening. "We didn't choose this, but what we formed is real. It's a bond that connects us in ways you cannot comprehend, and no matter how hard you try to tear it apart, it will only grow stronger." For a moment, the figures stood in silence, as if considering their words. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. Was it possible? Could they really be right? Could the bond between them, this strange, unexplainable connection, be powerful enough to stand against the Guardians? The figure's silent contemplation was unsettling. But then, without warning, the Guardian's shape distorted further, becoming a mass of swirling shadows, its form twisting and writhing like smoke caught in a storm. The air around them grew heavier, charged with an almost palpable electricity. Jake could feel the pull of the shadows, the weight of the figure's presence bearing down on them like a storm cloud ready to burst. "You still do not understand," the Guardian said, its voice now a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ground. "The force that connects you, it is a corruption, a stain on the fabric of the universe. It was never meant to exist, and for that, you will both be punished." The words stung like a slap, but Jake refused to flinch. He felt Lyra's presence beside him, strong and unwavering, and for a moment, he allowed himself to believe that they could overcome this. The bond between them, the love, the strength they had built, it was more than just a connection. It was something real, something that couldn't be destroyed so easily. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, the energy around them growing more unstable by the second. It felt like the entire world was tilting, the pull of gravity shifting as if trying to drag them down into the depths. The Guardian's eyes glowed brighter now, 2 points of piercing light in the swirling darkness. "We have no choice but to make you understand," it said, the words slicing through the air like a blade. "You will see the truth soon enough." Suddenly, the ground split beneath them with a deafening crack. Jake barely had time to react before the world around them began to crumble. A massive force pulled at him, the darkness and shadows threatening to consume him whole. It was as if the very fabric of reality was coming apart, unraveling around him. He reached for Lyra, but the pull of the shadows was too strong, dragging them apart. "No," he shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. Lyra's hand slipped from his as the darkness overwhelmed them both. But even as the shadows tried to tear them apart, Jake felt the bond between them pulse stronger than ever. The energy that had once seemed so foreign, so overwhelming, now felt like a beacon. It was the light in the dark, the force that tethered them together, even as the world around them seemed to collapse. He was falling, spiraling into the abyss, but he refused to let go. He wouldn't lose her. He couldn't. His heart pounded with the weight of his resolve, and as the darkness closed in, he focused on the one thing that mattered: the bond. Lyra. For a moment, everything was quiet. The pull of the shadows, the crumbling ground, all faded into nothing. Jake felt a weightlessness, as if time itself had stopped. He could still feel Lyra, her presence, her energy, pulsing with him, a steady rhythm in the chaos. And then, as if answering the call of their connection, a surge of light erupted from within him, filling the space around them, pushing back the shadows. He wasn't alone. They weren't alone. Together, they had the power to fight back. As the light pushed the darkness away, the Guardian's form flickered, then seemed to freeze. It trembled, as if uncertain of how to react to the sudden shift in power. But Jake didn't wait. He reached out with every ounce of his strength, calling to Lyra, pulling her back toward him. And as their hands finally met again, the bond between them flared to life, brighter than ever. The darkness recoiled, its grip weakening. The Guardian's form wavered, destabilizing as if unable to withstand the force of their connection. Jake's voice broke the silence, steady and sure. "We're not giving up. We'll never let you break us."